Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the soundbites. Today, Ben Kinsley is joining me. Hi, Ben, how are you?
Good, thank you.
All right. And our special guest is Matt Dunne. He's the founder and executive director of the Center on Rural Innovations. Matt, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Pat. Good to be back.
Repeat guest. Yeah, I was going to say.
November 4th, 2019, he was a guest. So,
okay, you know that.
So you know how it goes here. You have to talk a little bit about yourself in the beginning. So why don't you take it away?
Happy to. So I am from Heartland, Vermont, where I grew up, and served in the legislature for a tour in the House while helping to grow a Vermont-based software company. Went off, served in the Clinton administration and Bush administration as the head of AmeriCorps Vista. Came back, served 2 terms in the state Senate while working at Dartmouth College, and then was recruited by Google to go and head up their community affairs program and build it from scratch. There was a moment where I wasn't sure if that was actually going to happen, as I think you know, because when they talked to me, they got very excited about my experience and what they needed to do. And then they said, "How soon can you move to Mountain View, California?" And I said, "Never." And they weren't sure what to do with that. And there was a long, very quiet 4 months without hearing from them. And they finally came back and said, "All right, fine. We need you in North Carolina next week. We don't care where you live." So did that. Tried to get back involved in politics, as you know, which didn't work out so well. But after a tour at the MIT Media Lab, really digging into the issues that I care about, which is rural economies, we launched this new organization called the Center on Rural Innovation to help to build digital economy jobs in small town America.
And
you guys you're based in Springfield, right? Is that correct?
No, we're actually based here in Heartland Three Corners.
Okay.
So we're right in metropolitan downtown Heartland. But our pilot is in Springfield, Vermont, which is the Black River Innovation Campus. I actually drove here from there. It's another couple of exits down 91 from Heartland.
Yep. Yeah, cool. But the organization is not just focused on Vermont, right? It's a national organization, right?
It is. And our general, the reason why we stood it up is that, we have seen a rural opportunity gap grow in this country since the 2008 recession in a way that we've never seen it before. There's never been the kind of division. And the reason for that is that automation accelerated and globalization accelerated, and that created jobs and it took away jobs. The problem is that it created jobs almost exclusively in urban places, and it took them away in rural places. And you can count the entire gap, and it's a gap. Most urban counties came back to their pre-recession levels within 4 years. A majority of rural counties, even as of January of 2020, had not hit their pre-recession economic levels. So this is an enormous gap, and you can account for almost all of it with digital economy jobs. All things. So as of January of this year, rural America represented 15% of the workforce, but only had 5% of the digital economy technology jobs. And so we believe if we're going to reach geographic equity, we need to bring that up. That doesn't mean all rural jobs need to be digital economy jobs, and it doesn't mean all digital economy jobs have to be in rural. But if automation is going to continue, which it certainly is, especially with the pandemic, and the speed of growth of those kinds of jobs, you want to make sure that rural America benefits in some way from that piece of the economy.
That's great. This October, you celebrated your 3rd anniversary, correct? Of your center. And that was the year, of course, you just mentioned it about the pandemic. And it sounds like you were a little busy during the pandemic, not necessarily pursuing, what your vision, but you were looking at indexing communities where the greatest employment risks are. Could you explain that? That sounded fascinating to me.
Sure. So, when the pandemic hit, we wanted to make sure that we were playing our part. And a lot of the work that we had done early on was data analysis to try to get our arms around just the kind of statistics that I was sharing now. What is happening in rural America? Why is there such a difference? And we actually got, contracted to work with Fannie Mae to help them in understanding how to do investments in multi-unit housing in because they hadn't done a lot of it since 2007. And so we had a really great data science team and the like. And so the pandemic hit, and we said, all right, I think like most people, what's the role we play as as an organization, as a citizen of this country that's facing this crisis? And so we did two things. One was we did a partnership with Stat News and New Lab to look at the risk of overwhelming rural hospitals. So we actually looked at staffing of rural hospitals, and then what would happen if there was crazy things like people moving to their second homes. Mm-hmm. And the pandemic would hit. So we did that first, which was really well received, and people were able to make some decisions on how they could allocate resources. But then the other thing we wanted to do is look at the types of jobs that were at the highest risk in a pandemic shutdown. And out that the kinds of jobs in rural places, including tourism and in-person manufacturing and other jobs like that, are disproportionately rural and much harder to do in a remote setting, and therefore at higher risk. And we saw that play out with unemployment rates.
Yeah, I mean, you look at the restaurant and tourism industry. I mean, that was, in Vermont at least, that was definitely the hardest hit. And manufacturing, largely got a bye this time. We'll see if they're as lucky going, in what appears to be a second wave that we're going into.
Yep.
But yeah, and that's definitely because you can't do that remote, right?
Yep.
I'm curious. There's a lot to unpack here about like rural economies, especially given the dynamics of this pandemic, where rural areas seem to be safer, at least from a transmission risk standpoint. And there is there's been a fair amount of reporting on how people are shifting, coming out of cities, second homeowners, like you mentioned, but also people that don't own second homes here, that are here staying for long periods of time, 5, 6, months. Who knows? They could stay longer than that. So, do we think that? I'm curious if you think that some of this, the social aspects of the pandemic are actually going to create more opportunities for rural economies.
I think it will. And it was funny, we had been spending a number of years trying to convince people that, rural remote work and broadband were important. And I wouldn't have wished the pandemic on anyone ever, but it seemed to bring those things to light, right?
Proof point.
I was like, so, and we have been following what we've been referring to as a tech migration. Again, we focus in on technology or technology-enabled jobs, and you saw a huge increase in the number of people who were responding to surveys that they were technology workers and that were suddenly saying they were living in rural counties. I mean, big jump from February to June. We've seen that diminish a little bit in this fall. I think as people were making decisions perhaps to go back to cities and that kind of thing. But we've seen some of it stick. And I do think that there are a couple of impacts. One is it turns out remote work, particularly in the technology sector, isn't that hard, right? You can do it. And my story at Google was that I'd been working out of White River Junction, out of this office we'd set up for 5 years, and I had colleagues who didn't realize I wasn't in California. Yeah, they had a big, Google logo behind me in the video conference room. It was all, I would fly out for the big meetings, right? That was fun. And they had no idea. They were like, where are you? And so I think as companies like Zillow have decided they're going permanently remote,
Yep.
and Microsoft is saying the same thing, there is suddenly an opening of an aperture for hiring people where you don't have to be, within the same zip code as where your office is, and that's, I think, great for places like Vermont that have unbelievable quality of life. That it isn't that hard to make it back for that meeting, right? If you really need to be in place, and can create a sort of resetting of where people can work. What I also think is that people are moved to rural places quickly and suddenly realized that it was a place that they could do aspirational work. Now, if they moved to a place like someone I know who bought a house in Chelsea, Vermont, and didn't check to see if it had broadband,
whoops,
not such a great move. But in the places where they do have high-speed internet, where EC fiber is gone, or where VTEL, I mean, I've got faster internet speed right here in my office in Heartland than anyone in New York can get. Gigabit through the building, right? So once they realize, oh, I can do this from here, and it's a lot nicer, and I'm not in a commute for 45 minutes each way, I think people started to say, I can have a different choice. And went against that narrative that the only way to have an aspirational career was somehow having to shoehorn yourself into a big urban area where you were paying $3,000 a month for a studio apartment. So anyway, it's I think there's that kind of mental shift that's happening, and we'll see how long it lasts post pandemic. I don't think everyone who has made the transition up here is going to stay, but that's all right. Even if some of them decide to stay and raise a family. When was the last time you heard student counts going up in places like Woodstock? It's been a long time, and so we think there's it's a good mindset shift. We just now need to seize that moment and make sure we can show that what's possible.
It's interesting because there's some small districts that are actually concerned about hitting the excess spending threshold, like spending too much money given their budget from last year, because they've had this influx of students they now need to educate. And it's the reverse problem that most districts have had for the last 2 decades.
Sure.
Which is interesting.
Well, I think people are very aware of what their capacity is because of the schools and having the kids stay at home. So everybody is attuned to this. It's a great time to talk about all the advantages your company's trying to pursue. Because we were talking the other day of what is this place going to look like when COVID is finally open. My daughter hasn't been in her work since it started, and they want her to work at home from now, and she's like thrilled to death. She thinks it's great. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the way we educate, the way we work. I don't think it's half bad.
No, and I'm hopeful. The other big we do all the pieces of helping grow digital economy ecosystems. So we help with training people in digital economy jobs and computer science. And we're in the middle of a great partnership with Udacity, where they were willing to give us 300 scholarships to their programs. We're doing this competition across our network because we are working, to the earlier point, with communities across all 4 time zones, 18 different communities. Springfield's our base, our pilot. I told Bob Flint where I was going to make all the mistakes, but we do it there first. And
I'm sure they were pleased to hear that.
No. And Bob was just, he knows that Springfield has to keep diversifying and finding its new path. And we're happy to learn with us. And he's a great partner in that. But we also are about helping support startups, scalable tech companies in these rural places. And my hope is that the next thing that will follow is investors being willing to consider investing in tech companies in rural places. Because that's then the other hard part, right? They're like, really? could you actually do a tech company in a rural place? And of course you can, right?
Yeah.
Just like my friends at who started Dealer.com, in Franklin County, right? You can do that. So anyway.
Senator Douglas used to always say that and his staff, that we have the workforce here. They're just not, in one area. They're scattered all over. So this would answer that question about workforce.
Exactly.
So you have the numbers. They're just not in Burlington or in Springfield. So Matt, I wanted to ask you about a pilot program that you have that I read about called Sustainable Food Lab. That sounded very timely, for sure.
So it's not a pilot program, which I could take credit for. The Sustainable Food Lab is actually another nonprofit, but they were kind enough to be our fiscal sponsor. So the Center on Rural Innovation is a 501c3 nonprofit, and until we got our designation, they were willing to be our fiscal sponsor. So that's why you see them connected to our website.
I see.
And
it sounds great, because we've been so concerned in this pandemic about people eating well. And I think it's 1 in 4 Vermonters, this is the statistic that kills me in an agricultural state, 1 in 4 Vermonters deal with food insufficiency. It just drives me crazy. How can that be?
I know.
It's really sad.
If you're thinking about having other people on, the person who's really doing great work in that area is Sue Mentor. At her new job, and she's taking it on like she usually does, which is full on and full energy.
She's got such high energy. She makes me exhausted listening to her.
Exactly. No, but she's been driving that program of hitting that issue head on and trying to keep restaurants in business, right? So hitting both fronts.
Excellent.
So she's contracting with restaurants to get food to people who are food insecure, and it's anyway. Hats off to that work.
That's a great idea, because like we talked about earlier, like restaurants and the food industry were one of the hardest hit during the pandemic. It's like who's eating out? I mean, you can go to get takeout maybe, but sit down restaurants were not a thing there for quite a while.
No, it was a really smart. A smart way to try to address 2 issues at once. So I'd encourage you to have her on.
To help going out all the time and not cooking. So I'm doing my part. My husband does. I'm telling him I'm doing it for the state.
Supporting small businesses.
Exactly. That's my mission in life.
Yeah.
So Matt, Corey's strategy is kind of twofold. One, trying to develop scalable models, which is, you've talked about Springfield as one of those models. But then building connections with national organizations and building a network. So what are some of we talked about the food lab. What are some of the other organizations you've connected with around the country to help build some of these project areas out? And you said you have 18 of them now, at least, that are going.
Sure. So, there's 2 things. One is we work with a number of national organizations to be able to get resources to these communities. So we were actually on contract with the Economic Development Administration to do work, which was great. So helping communities understand that there are resources available at the federal level, that money that usually goes to cities, but actually is available for rural places. We have a partnership with a large law firm called Venable, which has a specialty in intellectual property work that's providing pro bono legal services to startups across our network. This partnership with Udacity that I mentioned at the Flatiron School, and that's really what we do. We can connect those national level resources to communities that aren't usually able to avail themselves of that. But the concept of a network was because none of us actually believed that one rural innovation hub by itself would survive. Right? There's not enough deal flow, even if you get an accelerator going, to attract large investors to be able to look at the companies coming through, and there isn't enough talent flow that if we wanted to get to the place where a larger company would say, all right, I need 150 software developers, could you find them in your distributed, network? It would be really hard to scale that up in a Springfield, within a couple of weeks. But if you have 15 or 20, then you can get network value, right? Where you have a virtual. So we went from Springfield raising $2 million for the Black River Innovation Campus, to give it 3 years of runway to get its accelerator program going, and its co-work space, and its training program, and school system, and the like. And then we received the contract from the EDA and started working with communities across the country. And it was funny because we were told by the EDA that we might have to go and literally knock on doors to get people at all interested, because they weren't sure if anyone in rural America was interested. And we put out this call for communities to work with us on this technical assistance, and we got over 100 communities.
Wow.
Raise their hand, and we only had time and space to work with 5 to 10. So we were able to narrow it down some, but they're just extraordinary. And a number of them have received Build to Scale grants with the EDA program. We've raised over $10 million with these communities, coaching them through the application process and matching funds and that kind of thing. And they're amazing, whether it's in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, or in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, up in Traverse City, Michigan, or Independence, Oregon. They're amazing group of change agents. And what they said was that the biggest relief they had working with us is they said, "Oh my God, we're not alone." Yep. They thought they were by themselves trying to do this world, and they'd go to an urban entrepreneurship conference, right? And they would be like, no, these guys have no idea what we're trying to do, because it's just different when you can specialize in, genetic, entrepreneurship around genetic biotech, right? That's not what you're going to be doing in a rural version of that. You're going to be working with lots of different kinds of scalable companies, and you want to be able to support them. So we've got this robust network of communities. They're sharing best practices. Frankly, in some ways, the best thing we can do is let them connect and get out of the way. Yep. They're solving for things, and then we can share that with the larger network across the board.
That's pretty cool. It's interesting looking at how scalable some of this stuff is. I work for a software company in my day job, and we were already 30% remote anyway before the pandemic hit, and we went 100% remote in about 2 days. And we're able to make that jump because, software, you don't necessarily, sometimes you need meeting space, right? If you're going to get groups of people together, but you can meet like this as well. So, for most things, you lose a little bit of the social aspect of it, but you can navigate that. But I think, there's no reason you can't build software or digital or tech jobs in a rural setting. I think one of the challenges why you don't see as much manufacturing in urban centers is because of the cost of space, right? Your cost per square foot is much higher in a city than it is out in a rural area. So manufacturing tends to be just outside cities because your space costs less, whereas software takes a lot less space, or digital, or any of the financial services. You need a desk and maybe 25, 30 square feet per employee, and there you go. So that makes a lot more economic sense in a city than manufacturing.
Yeah.
Matt, can I ask you something? We're talking about the innovation hubs, and I'm trying to figure it out. In the hub itself, is it like Bradbury's, where there's lots of different people working for lots of different companies, or is it you would set something up for one company? You know what I mean, what's in that hub?
I would have to say, David Bradbury taught me much of what I needed to know to be able to do this.
I love him. Yeah.
He set up a model for being able to do this, which is a blend of co-working, so that people who are working for companies and I remember, a colleague of mine from Google who always pretended that he was, based in Mountain View, California, but in fact lived in South Burlington, would sit next to a guy who worked for Twitter, who would sit next to someone who was working for Facebook. I mean, all in the same space. So, because you want to create that sense of community and that density for the what's sometimes called virtuous collisions, right? So it's when you have that conversation over a cup of coffee that sparks something and has a go. But you also want to make room for startups that are going to be companies that are just getting started and need a de-risked environment. Right? They need a place to go where they can have good, internet connectivity and something that looks professional. Yep. You can't afford, your own, fancy suite of offices, and so you're able to do that out of there. And then, what he's also done is introduced an investment vehicle, which is super important. Now he's done that in Burlington, and then he's got an operation in Middlebury, which he's working hard on. I would say Burlington is very much a city, even though it's not a huge, city. It feels and acts and serves as one for our region. So we're trying to take that and do it in even smaller markets, like a Springfield, Vermont, or a Traverse City, Michigan. And so that's really if you get that's sort of the vision of it. In Springfield, we're also, planning a redevelopment of the Park Street School, which is where it's now housed. But we've got all kinds of space that we can redevelop. And if it comes through, we'd actually build loft apartments in.
Wow.
So you'd have live work opportunities, and again, de-risking the ability for an entrepreneur to really stay focused on getting their company started.
For sure.
And we did stand up an investment fund. So we have the Corey Innovation Fund that invests in early stage tech companies. And in fact, we've invested in two that moved into the Black River Innovation Campus. So that's two more companies in Vermont. And anyway, it's a piece of the puzzle, but Dave Bradley really built the blueprint. That's for sure.
I couldn't figure out when you were talking whether it was built for one company who might want, as you said, 20 or several different companies, because that setup he has there. We did a show. I brought the camera and we walked around that place. That guy, it's a fun place to work. It's just like dealer.com. It's just fun.
Yeah.
It's cool. It's cool.
Yeah,
good.
It's about, supporting, I think anyway, when I think of like these innovation hubs and co-working spaces and maker spaces and all of the pieces that are part of this puzzle, and things like what David Bradbury has done in Burlington and whatnot, and what you're doing in Springfield. It's about a lot of it is about finding the next dealer.com, right? And enabling them to grow, because it's not enough to have, unfortunately, it's not enough to have a good idea. You also have to get traction with that idea. And it's things like the proof of concept stage and the early investment and the, getting it off the ground is oftentimes the hardest part of the whole piece. Once it's going, and you've got a company that's going, it'll you got momentum behind it, but it's that early stage piece that, like, to your point, is critical.
Yeah, and mentorship. Being able to connect folks to people who've been through it before is super important. Because if you're a great technologist that has an idea that's going to change a market, that doesn't mean that you have all the knowledge of how to structure a stock offer. Or be able to run a sales channel, right? So that's the other piece to this, is making sure you've got a good mentor network, which can be virtual, right? It can be localized or it can be virtual. And then also having talent nearby, because what's interesting is that part of what David did really well and what our communities are trying to do is also give people the feeling of permission that they can go and start something.
Yeah.
In many parts of rural America, it's just not part of the culture to go out and start a new enterprise. Side hustle, you do all day long, right? You'll have like three little LLCs doing other things and building something in your shop or whatever. But the idea that you could go and build a company that could scale and that could grow, and that failing at that once is okay, right? And that you're learning from that and you should come right back at it. That's a mindset shift. And so being able to have that density of activity going on in a fun environment, you're able to see other people who are doing similar things, right? And it changes the narrative of what is possible in rural places and by rural people.
And I think that's, I think that's what's interesting is that, you guys are obviously still in the startup phase, but we're starting to see, I think, the Burlington hub getting to that critical mass stage. I don't know that they're quite there yet, but there's enough of those examples of people in that community that have made it or are in the process of making it that you have those examples to look at, right? And the nice thing with Springfield and Middlebury and maybe even there's a Rutland community that's starting to come together. Those examples are nearby enough that you can see them and they're visible. And things like, obviously everyone knows dealer.com, but there's Logic Supply is another one. VIP who does distribution software for breweries. Yep. And which is not, they're I think one of the leading suppliers in North America now of distribution software, because you got to get the beer from the brewery to the bar, and it still better be good when it gets there.
Exactly. Imperative. No, and we're seeing it all. I mean, we've got, we're in Cape Girardeau. There's a guy who's using AI to do branding work. Grew up in Cape Girardeau, which is in the Mississippi Delta, went off to LA, worked for a big advertising firm at a high level at a young age. We realized the stuff they were doing wasn't that complicated, right? Looking at other brands that were associated and being able to package up something that would fit. And so he came back to Cape Girardeau to work out of his parents' garage and realized that they had started to build a tech ecosystem there. With tech training and a project shop and some other things. He was like, I can do this right here. And so he's sticking around and doing it. And so you're seeing that at Durango, Colorado, there's a rocket company. Right there, folks from NASA were like, why do we have to live in places we don't want to live? And they've got a little airport, they're using it. And they're doing cutting edge work, technology work with software and rockets together to be able to create the next generation of spaceships.
Well, on a bigger scale, Boise, Idaho is another tech hub that's starting to grow. It's growing.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see some of those. I don't know if I'd call them rural, but more inland cities that are kind of reinventing themselves or inventing themselves for the first time. Traverse City is kind of more of a reinvention scenario. But it's interesting.
That's great. So Matt, you keep talking, and Ben's mentioned it too, about the scalable model. And you've developed what you refer to as a scalable model for developing a rural digital economy. I'm presuming it's a model that can work whether it's a very small company or a very large company. You just expand it or contract it as the need, and it works.
You mean organization on the ground?
Right.
In the area. Yeah. No, it's about creating. It is about creating an ecosystem. So it's about connecting whatever higher education assets are there. It's about connecting to the employers of tech who you might not think of employers of tech. Hospitals hire a lot of software people. Right? Yep. Banks hire a lot of software people, and frequently higher education institutions hire a lot of software people. But they don't necessarily know that they can look locally for that talent, and the talent locally don't know that it's there. In fact, we had this, I won't name the name of the institution, who was saying, we've got a computer science program, but we tell them they should just move to Chicago because we don't know if there's any jobs here. And then we looked up on Indeed, and they had openings for 5 programmers at that college.
Wow.
And the person who was doing the hiring said, I always thought we had to go and hire in Chicago. I was like, no. Let's connect those dots. So creating, so it's not necessarily a huge organization, the innovation hub, but it serves that purpose of making the connections. It's just like, Dave Bradbury is not running a big operation. He creates places and spaces. He connects mentors to entrepreneurs. He creates, he's able to provide capital or connect people to capital. He celebrates the work that they're doing. Anyway, it's that kind of thing in smaller communities that is what makes it really work.
Right.
What it seems like is unique. What seems like is unique about Corey is that network aspect that you talked about early on, where it's not just Springfield going out on its own. It's not just Traverse City going out on its own. It's this whole network that is connected. They can share resources, they can share information, they can share opportunities that they come across. And that seems really powerful to me, because if you get all of these communities together, you kind of have to start wondering, are they, is that competitive with some of these bigger tech hubs? Like, of course, like San Francisco and the Bay Area, obviously is one of the biggest ones in the country. There's ones, a couple on the East Coast as well. But, but you kind of have to start wondering, if you add all of these little communities together, what do they add up to?
Right. No, I mean, if I remember correctly, all of the communities' populations put together is like the size of Nashville, right? I mean, so you can get to that interesting critical mass, especially and the exciting. The one thing we ask communities to commit to is that they're going to share, right? That they're not going to see it parochial, but they see this as all boats being lifted, and it's been great because they've all signed on. And they're sharing, curricula that they use for accelerators and programs they're doing in the K-12 system for computer science, this youth coding league that one of them's doing. And so they're being able to start those up in other places. And it really starts to feel, Ben, like that virtual community, or an ecosystem of ecosystem builders, which we really do think is key and exciting. And now that we've seen across the network over 200 possible deals for our seed fund. Not all of them right for us, right? But that says to me there's a critical mass. So once we get through this sort of demonstration phase, that we can start to attract other investors to be able to come in and look at these companies for the value proposition that they are.
It's pretty cool.
How do you reach out? You keep talking about the United States, reaching out to all of the states. How do you reach out to a specific state and know that they might need your services? And how do you get that? How do you get that connect going? It's a big place out there.
It is. So we did it through the networks we had as a team. We just sent out a big email call. We're also partners with an organization called Rural LISC, which is a national nonprofit that has done more traditional rural economic development, like housing and community centers and things like that. But they saw this as critically important, so they said, we want to help. And so they sent it out to their list. The EDA sent out, something through their economic developer. And so you just get networks of networks. And the team we've put together, which just, the most exciting thing is when you have a group of really, smart people that are excited about the same cause, are all people who grew up in rural and were steeped in rural, had the privilege of working for some world-class organizations, and are now wanting to be a part of helping make that bridge happen. And so I have a network, which is pretty good, doing the Google kind of stuff. They all had network like that, and the word got out. And we, I was on the road when people used to be on the road, speaking at national conferences in a bunch of different states and sharing this vision. And that's what came through. also do data analytics on places. So I remember we reached out to Platteville, Wisconsin, and because we showed up as having a 4-year college with a CS program. They had broadband, really fast internet connectivity, and they were in an opportunity zone. And we said, all right, we're getting all those things. We want to talk to these people. And they came on board. We had a great visit with them. They then went through this intensive strategy program, which is what we put people through as part of applying for the Build to Scale program. It's our capacity building work. And they were successful. They raised $1.2 million out of that. And they're now building a entrepreneurship center that's going to take their 2,000 CS graduates per year that they didn't have a home for in their immediate community. And
that's great.
We're like, this should be, I mean, it's not easy, but if you've got that kind of talent coming through, just creating a vessel and a place for them to do really interesting entrepreneurial work or work with a team that's doing something that's more groundbreaking, they're not all going to move to Madison or San Francisco. So anyway, that kind of thing.
You mentioned housing, and the big issue here for employers is when they hire somebody, there's not the right housing here for people sometimes. And so they lose the candidate. And so work from home where you are if you're happy, and everybody wins.
That can happen. The other side, though, is you really do want to be redeveloping downtowns, the places where folks want to live.
Right.
And Pat, as you know, I spent a good chunk of my career working on redevelopment in White River Junction.
Right.
And when I started doing that in 1993, people thought I was out of my mind. Right.
Yeah.
I remember members of the select board saying, "Okay, Matt, right." It took a while, but it is now just going gangbusters. It is. I don't know the last time you were there, but they're now constructing a 60-unit apartment building with lofts.
Wow.
They've already built over 200 units in little downtown White River Junction of cool, hip apartments, all in walking distance to now great restaurants and a phenomenal brewery, the Northern Stage Theater, all of those things, and tech companies that have emerged and evolved in that area because the talent wants to be around that. You want to do both of those things at once, so you don't have that situation where you're like, "Hey, come join our software company, but by the way, you need to live 15 minutes away and in a cul-de-sac that someone doesn't want to live in," right? So that's
I'm going to go check that out because it sounds fabulous. White River Junction. The only thing I think there's a hotel there we used to go to for events, and across the street was the station, which they've just turned upside down. That place is great.
Yeah, well,
that's my White River Junction.
Yeah, the Center for Cartoon Studies is now down there, which is the top graphic novel school in the country.
Yeah,
I heard that. Yeah,
it's got a vibe. USA Today referred to it as the Brooklyn of Vermont.
I don't know what that means.
That's pretty cool, actually.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Pretty close in White River,
Yeah. So we've got a few minutes left here, and one of the things we should talk about is where do we go? Where do we see the rural economy fitting into a post-COVID world? Like, where do you see that going? Obviously the pandemic has turned a lot of things on its head, and as we talked about at the beginning of the show, presents some opportunities, but what is that going to look like or what do you think that will look like in a post-COVID world?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that we need to recognize. One is that COVID has accelerated automation at a really intense level. I mean, the recession accelerated automation, which is one of the reasons it led to that division and recovery. And COVID is doing that not only because of the economic impact, but also because of people's concern of not having people in direct contact, right? The ski areas are going to be coming back online, and there isn't going to be anyone taking people's tickets or selling tickets, right? These things are just continuing to accelerate. So there there's some real risk in rural places that coming out of this, if we're not proactive in giving people skilling opportunities, be able to get into the kinds of jobs that will be resilient in the face of automation, that we're going to have a prolonged impact from that recession. On the other side, I do think we have a moment where people are saying, hey, if I can do this from a rural place where everyone's not stacked up on top of each other, that might be better. And that, I think, inviting people to be a part of that, making sure they look to see if there's broadband at the house that they buy first is a good idea. But this is, I think there's that moment. And I also think that there's a force function on companies looking at remote work as an option. And hopefully we'll get to the place where they feel comfortable having remote paid interns, right? Because that's usually how people come into the software industry, is a paid intern. And for whatever reason, software companies were allergic to this idea that you could do a paid internship in a remote way. We're going to have to figure it out, and we're excited about that because we think we can find talent. The other force function, though, is on broadband. And one part of my organization is now doing nothing but helping rural communities do the pre-development and assessment work so that they can build fiber to the home networks. And I think what has been laid bare is what happens if you don't have, a world-class broadband system in the country. And it's also caused people to start investing in it and to not just do the short-term stuff, which we have to do, but to actually say, all right, we don't want to be in this position again. We can do as well as other countries like, South Korea, and actually build the kind of broadband infrastructure that is, ready for the biggest economic superpower in the world's history, right? We should be able to do that, similar to what we did with electricity coming out of the Great Depression. So, and what happened when the nation went and said, we are going to make rural electrification a thing, it opened up all kinds of opportunities. Kids did not read less in the winter because you had to read by Kindle, right?
Right.
Manufacturing firms were able to start in rural places that weren't just next to a hydro dam because they were able to get electricity wheeled to them to be able to have a manufacturing plant. And you had an incredible growth in economic opportunity in rural places. We're at that same moment now.
Exciting for you. Your staff must be thrilled to come to work every day because there's always going to be something new and exciting to get involved in.
We are not bored, Pat. We are not.
I bet.
That is
how many staff do you have, Matt?
Well, we're at 23 people right now, on our way to 30. About a third of them are distributed. So we've got 2 people who live in Colorado and a person who works out of South Carolina. But most of them are right here in the Upper Valley and work out of this great space. We're in a former, in what was, when I was a kid, a general store building. But we've now turned it into a cool collaborative space.
That is so great. That's great. I really very impressed. And I hear you work with Chris Recchia from time to time at ValleyNet.
We do indeed.
I had him on last week, and I asked him, and he said, "Oh yes, we work together." So lots of happening in your industry.
Yeah, no, we're working with them both on helping other communities to figure out how to do an EC fiber like model. But we're also just starting to do some work in Randolph. Which I just think is a community also with all the assets.
For sure.
Yeah, a tech school right there, and high-speed internet, and post-industrial downtown, and all of those key markers that we've talked about.
Absolutely. No, anyway, it's and not too far from Norwich, right? Which has an unbelievable cybersecurity program. and not too far from Dartmouth, right? You can actually, if someone's in Dartmouth and living in Royalton or Bethel, just as easy to go north as to go south. So it's anyway. We're excited to start doing some work in another Vermont community.
That's great.
It's great.
Well, we thank you for that, and we thank you for joining us tonight. Ben, thank you for your assist, and
of course,
we'll be watching. And thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you next week, and in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.